Hello, my name is Rain and welcome to my channel where I discuss fantasy Formula 1. Today's video is a bit of a special one. It's not your usual transfer plans video. It's not your usual team selection video. Rather, it's a video completely about the Limitless chip. And not only in Austria, but the Limitless chip in sprint weekends with the scoring format that we have in F1 Fantasy 2024. If you're wondering about other chips, such as the triple DRS boost and no negative, I will discuss all of those in my team selection video that's out on Friday. This video is specifically about the Limitless chip, because this video is going to be useful in the future as well for other sprint weekends and not only for Austria. But I wanted to get this video out now because I know a lot of you have been thinking about using the Limitless in Austria. Why? Well, because we all, I think, rightfully assumed, or I guess it's wrongfully assumed, but it's understandable why we assumed this, that we should use the Limitless in a sprint weekend, because in a sprint weekends, there's 2 events, there's more places that you can get points, so of course you want to get the assets that score the most points in sprint weekends. Well, after the Chinese Grand Prix, F1 Fantasy Tools posted this thread on Twitter, and I could not believe it initially, but after reading through it, I am a firm believer, and I mean, you don't really need to believe it, it's maths, right? The maths say that you shouldn't necessarily use your Limitless in sprint weekend. There are exceptions to this, an exception to this was China. Actually, they posted this after Miami, but an exception to this was China, where the Limitless was very powerful, but it was powerful for a specific reason, and I'm going to discuss why. All of this is in this thread. All of this information that I'm sharing now, not all of it, some of the information is, my own thoughts on the matter, but all the data is from F1 Fantasy Tools. It's a fantastic website. You should use it. I talk about it all the time, and I will link to this thread so you can read through it yourself if you want, but I'm gonna make some graphics to sort of explain it in simpler terms if you'd like. The first thing you need to think about is, why are you playing the Limitless chip, and what happens when you play it? Well, you're playing the Limitless chip to get the most points possible, right? Well, not really, right? You are playing a game where technically you're not trying to get the most points possible, you're trying to get more points than everyone else who is playing it, whether that's, your friends in a mini league or the global leaderboard of over 2 million teams, right? So let's divide up, for any given race weekend, all the 2.2 million or the 5 people in your mini league into non-limitless players and limitless players. Those who are playing their Limitless chip and those who aren't. Because when you play your Limitless chip, you afford all of the big assets that no one else is affording. You have Max Verstappen, you have Lando Norris, you have Hamilton, you have Leclerc, you have Red Bull Racing, you have McLaren. No one else can have that team. So your team is completely unique to other players. But they also have their Limitless. So that means that the goal of the Limitless is that you get more points than the non-limitless users, not when they play their chip, but in that specific weekend. So it's actually not your points total that matter, it's the difference between your team, your Limitless team, and the non-limitless regular players, right? If you were just, aiming to get the biggest chunk of points possible, of course you would play your Limitless in a sprint because there are more points in the sprint, but the non-limitless players also get more points in a sprint, and it is the difference between the two teams that determines when you should play your Limitless, when the best time to play your Limitless is. All right, moving on. So why is this difference in points greater in a regular weekend rather than in a sprint weekend? Max Verstappen is getting like 70 points. Well, it's mostly due to how the sprint points are distributed. So this is directly taken from the F1 Fantasy website. This is the points you can get in a sprint race in F1 Fantasy. So what you get is 8 to 1 point, and that's the points that the actual drivers get in the actual Formula 1 points, but who's really counting. So Max Verstappen, who takes pole, wins the sprint race, gets 8 points instead of the usual 25, whereas the positions gained and the overtakes made are still worth 1 point. So it's that difference in price that actually ends up mattering a lot. Let's use Miami as an example. The best performing Limitless team in Miami was what you see on the left here. We're ignoring constructors for now because when you're building your Limitless team, you know, the non-Limitless users aren't all running C-tier assets, right? They still have good assets on their team. They're probably going to have one of those 5 drivers on the left, and then they're going to have 2 probably premium constructors that you also have on your Limitless team, right? So just look at the difference here, and the one thing that I also see people mention is like, oh yeah, you know, I see that the C-tier assets are performing better in the sprint, but they're still worse in the race. Yes, they're worse in the race. That's why you should use it in a non-sprint weekend. So, for example, we ignore Norris here because Norris DNF'd, but look at the other assets that were the optimal assets, or ended up being optimal after the race. It was Charles Leclerc, Sainz, Perez, Verstappen. And if we assume that the non-Limitless users have, you know, say it's going to be Norris or Verstappen who is their DRS boosted driver, or they have a double B lineup, they have maybe both Leclerc and Norris, or both Leclerc and Checo, or, you know, the Hamilton or Russell and Piastri, because, you know, they're also up there now, maybe rather than the Ferraris. But in Miami, these were the 5 best picks. That was what you should have picked, those 5. That was the most points you could have gotten as a Limitless user. But if you look at the actual sprint, only Verstappen outscored the other assets. I mean, look at assets like Leclerc, like Sainz, like Perez, right? They're on 7, 7, and 6 points. Meanwhile, you have assets like Tsunoda, 11, Sargent, 10, Gasly, 9, Bottas, 9, Show, 8, Ricardo, 8, Albon, 8, Hulkenberg's on 6, that's not far behind. Piastri only ended up with 3, Hamilton with 1, Russell with -1, Ocon ended up on 0, Magnussen -2, but the C-tier assets just perform better in the sprint than not all of the premium assets. I mean, you see Verstappen did perform the best, but there is a very clear indication that the C-tier assets do get more points in the sprint than those drivers that are going to end up 5th, 6th, you know? Because they're going to qualify there, like at Leclerc, and finish there. So for that reason, in the sprint alone, the C-tiers are getting more points, which means that once you get to the race, yes, you get more points because you have good drivers, but you would have gotten those points over non-Limitless users in other weekends as well. So let's take, I don't know, Spain, for example. No DNFs there. That's a good starting point. If you had used your Limitless in Spain, you would have gotten so much more points than non-Limitless users. I mean, look at this. If you pick the best 5 assets in Spain, Norris, Verstappen, Hamilton, Russell, and Perez, maybe even if you got a Leclerc and Sainz there over maybe like a Russell or Perez, it would have been close. Compared to the C-tier assets down here, the points difference here is amazing. And yes, you could see a similar point difference in the actual race in Austria, but because in the sprint, those C-tiers are just getting a few extra points over the B-tier assets, it's better to use it in a non-sprint weekend. I'm not saying you should never play the Limitless in a sprint weekend though. The very, very powerful thing about sprint weekends this year is that since the deadline now is on the Saturday at the start of the sprint race, you can actually watch the sprint qualifying before making your decisions. And Limitless in China was really, really effective. These are the points here. This is straight from the thread. We knew in the sprint qualifying that our Limitless drivers were also going to get overtake and positions gained on top of their finishing positions. So as you can see, the Limitless was very, very powerful in China because the drivers that you wanted on your Limitless started further back. Back to the main question. Should you Limitless in Austria? And I think it boils down to just 2 simple points. Yes, if the Limitless drivers that you want start further back. Or if you don't expect the C-tier drivers that you have in your team to be able to overtake. In those two instances, yes, you can Limitless in Austria. No, you should not Limitless if the Limitless drivers that you want qualify P1 through 5, or even like P1 through 6. Or if it rains. Austria is looking to be a rainy one, and in rain, anything can happen. There could be pit stops in a sprint if there are changing conditions. People could be sliding all about. There could be overtakes all over the place. Then you do not want to Limitless, because then the C-tier drivers are going to look like they did in Miami and actually be stronger than those Limitless drivers for the sprint. If you're watching this in the far future, when we're getting to other sprint races in Kota, in Sao Paulo, and in Qatar, the same principle still applies. Yes, if the Limitless drivers you want start further back. Yes, if you don't expect C-tier drivers to overtake, you should not use it if the Limitless drivers you want qualify P1 through 6, or if it rains, or if it's looking like a good track for overtaking. But if not in a sprint weekend, when? In Monaco, when no one is overtaking at all? Or perhaps in race 2? The reason it's not race 1 is because you actually cannot use your Limitless in the first weekend. You have to build your team regularly. So the Limitless as a chip is not unlocked until race week 2. But there are pros and cons to it. If you use it in race week 2, I said this earlier in the season as well, when we thought that using the Limitless is best in a sprint. I said that you should use the Limitless in an earlier sprint weekend because non-Limitless users have worse teams. So I was sort of teetering on the right find there. But if you use the Limitless in race week 2, it's a single race weekend. The non-Limitless users are poor and have worse teams, so it could be the most optimal time to use the Limitless chip. The negative with using it in race week 2 is that you won't have it sort of ready, right? If the perfect sprint weekend like China shows up. And that's where now the dilemma lies. Do you sit and hold the Limitless in hope that a sprint weekend like China shows up? I'm talking for next year by now, by the way. If you are sitting with your Limitless, do you wait and hope that a sprint race like China shows up so you can play the Limitless then? Or do you use it immediately to just get the most effect that you can from a single race weekend? Well, I don't know the answer to that. It all depends. The sprint format has changed over the past 3 years. I think the reason why I would want to hold it, hoping a sprint race like China shows up, is just because we have that sprint qualifying session that gives us a good indication of what points we can expect our Limitless drivers to get. If they removed sprint qualifying in its entirety and return to the sprint format we saw in 2022, when there was just one qualifying and then there was the sprint, and the sprint sort of led into the race, that whole thing, and we go back to having a deadline before seeing sprint qualifying, either in 2020, 2022, or in 2023, when we had the regular qualifying and then sprint qualifying, sort of sprint Saturday, if you will. If they revert the sprint format to any of those, I think you just rip it in race week 2. If there's no way for you to figure out when or where drivers in your Limitless team are going to be standing on that sprint grid, I think you use it in race 2. If they keep this sprint format for next season, maybe there's an argument there to hold it and hope. But the longer throughout the season that you get, the worse the Limitless chip gets in a single race weekend, because people get better and better budgets and people get better and better teams, which means that your Limitless team is going to look closer to the non-Limitless players, which means the difference is lesser, which means you gain less points compared to them. I've talked about this now. But yeah, that's about it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. More talk about chip strategies in Austria will be in my team selection video out on Friday. If you want as well, on Friday I'm doing a sprint quali watch along live on this channel, so subscribe so you do not miss it. We're also doing a deadline stream, of course, as we've done for the past 4 weekends, on Saturday at 10 a.m. before the sprint starts. Don't miss the earlier deadline this week. You do not want to not make transfers for Austria. That's it for this video. Like the video, subscribe, road to 1000. I'll see you there. Bye.